By the time the first siren shattered the quiet night, smoke had already begun to creep across the rooftops of Riverside Estates. The glow on the horizon wasn't the kind of soft orange flicker you get from backyard bonfires. It was brighter, harsher, like the sky itself was burning. And when the fire trucks finally arrived, their path was blocked. A chain stretched across the entrance, padlocked tight. Beside it, a pristine white Lexus sat angled like a sentinel, guarding the gate to a neighborhood built on control. The firefighters jumped out, confusion turning to fury as the seconds ticked away. Behind that locked barrier, someone's home, someone's life, was going up in flames. And the cruelest irony? The same woman who demanded those gates be locked to keep out outsiders now stood on the other side of them, begging to get through. This is the story of a community that prided itself on perfection. Perfect lawns, perfect mailboxes, perfect silence. A place where neighbors smiled at each other during morning walks, then filed anonymous complaints before sunset. A place where rules mattered more than people, until one rule, one chain, nearly cost everything. But this didn't start with fire. It started months earlier with whispers at HOA meetings, petty fines, and one woman's obsession with control. She wasn't evil, not exactly. Just a believer in order, in rules, in her power to keep everything just the way she liked it. Until her need for control became the spark that would burn her world to ashes. What happened that night would tear the facade off Riverside Estates, exposing secrets its board had buried for years. It would turn neighbor against neighbor, uncover corruption hiding behind polished smiles, and force the community to face a truth they never wanted to see. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the ones that destroy us. And when the smoke cleared, one question echoed through every scorched street and shattered window, a question that still divides this neighborhood to this day. When control becomes obsession, how far will someone go before everything they love goes up in flames? Riverside Estates was the kind of neighborhood that looked perfect from the outside, the kind of place real estate agents called exclusive and residents called safe. Manicured lawns rolled in precise lines, trimmed hedges, framed identical white mailboxes, and every driveway gleamed with the reflection of late afternoon sun. Even the birds seemed to sing more politely here, as though afraid to disturb the silence. To an outsider, it was paradise, peaceful, orderly, almost too good to be true. Marcus Thompson had lived there for 15 years. A volunteer firefighter, husband and father of 2 grown kids who'd long since moved out. He'd bought the house back when Riverside Estates was new, back when the lots were cheaper, the rules looser, and neighbors actually waved from their porches instead of peeking through curtains. His home sat at the far edge of the development, a modest brick colonial with an old oak shading the front yard and a flagstone path leading to the door. He'd built the back deck himself one summer, sweating under the heat and proud of every uneven board. To Marcus, Riverside had once meant stability, the place where he and his wife, Lynn, could settle after years of renting. But over time, things changed. The HOA had always been there, of course, sending reminders about trash pickup and community picnics. It wasn't until the last few years that it started to tighten. The letters grew sterner, the meetings longer, and the fines? They multiplied like weeds. Still, Marcus wasn't the type to make waves. He paid his dues, mowed his lawn, and attended the occasional board meeting, where retirees debated things like mailbox paint or the height of seasonal wreaths. It was tedious but harmless until the election that brought Karen Hartley into power. Karen was new money with old manners, or at least her version of them. She'd moved into Riverside just a year before, buying one of the larger properties near the entrance. Her house was a white-columned statement of superiority, with imported rose bushes and a front fountain that burbled like a soft boast. People said she used to work in real estate. Others whispered about a divorce settlement that funded her fresh start. What everyone agreed on was that she loved control. Within weeks of moving in, Karen was attending every HOA meeting, offering suggestions that sounded more like commands. By the next election, she was running unopposed, Once she became president, Riverside changed overnight. She replaced the weathered neighborhood sign with one that gleamed under gold leaf letters: Riverside Estates, a community of excellence. She issued a new handbook of regulations thicker than the local phone book, and she enforced every rule with the enthusiasm of a warden. The first casualties were the mailboxes. Karen claimed that too many residents had deviated from the approved color code, the official shade of black. Within a month, 10 households received violation letters. Then came the lawn inspections. One neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Dalton, was fined $50 for having decorative stones of non-uniform shape. Another was cited for hanging Christmas lights 3 days past the allowed removal date. It all sounded absurd, but Karen enforced it with a smile so tight it might have cracked glass. Marcus mostly stayed out of it until she came for him. It started small. A note left in his mailbox about the unauthorized length of his grass. He'd been working a 24-hour shift with the fire department and missed his usual weekend mowing. He shrugged it off. Then came a citation for leaving his trash cans out past 9 a.m. on pickup day. He checked the cameras later. They'd been out for exactly 11 minutes. When he attended the next board meeting to ask for leniency, Karen listened politely, nodding as though she understood. Then she denied his appeal with a sugary tone that made it sound like his fault for not caring enough about community standards. That was the first red flag. Still, Marcus didn't want trouble. His wife had passed 2 years earlier, and quiet was all he wanted. He filled his time with small home projects and volunteer shifts at the fire station where he felt useful, where rules made sense. But Karen wasn't finished. At the following HOA meeting, she proposed a security initiative. She claimed there had been unverified reports of trespassers using neighborhood roads to cut through to the main highway. Her solution: install chain barriers at every secondary entrance. It was meant to protect property values and privacy. Most of the board nodded along. They always did. But Marcus froze. As a firefighter, he knew what that meant. Locked barriers could delay emergency access, especially if the fire trucks couldn't use the narrow main gate. He raised his hand, calmly explaining the risk, citing response times, and even offering to meet with the fire chief to find a better solution. But Karen dismissed him with that familiar, dismissive smile. "Oh, Marcus," she said lightly, "you're being dramatic. I'm sure the fire department can manage to use a key like everyone else." It wasn't about keys. It was about seconds. The difference between saving a house or watching it burn to the foundation. But the board didn't want to hear it. They wanted peace, not confrontation. The vote passed 6-1. After that, Marcus started noticing the shift. People avoided his gaze during morning walks. Conversations that used to happen over fences now stopped when he approached. Karen had that effect, subtle intimidation masked as charm. When she talked, people agreed. When she smiled, they obeyed. And when she disapproved, everyone knew it. The fines against Marcus continued. Oil spots on his driveway. A non-compliant garden hose left visible. Even a letter about his American flag being slightly faded. Each envelope arrived with the same letterhead: Riverside Estates HOA, upholding community standards since 2006. He started keeping a folder, not out of defiance, but because something told him he'd need it. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating about Karen's allies on the board. There was Dennis Cole, the vice president, who managed a local insurance branch and owed Karen favors after she had helped him through a zoning complaint. There was Sandra Liu, the treasurer, quiet and agreeable, a woman who voted however Karen told her to. And then there was Barry Linton, the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. He liked to walk his dog at odd hours, always noticing violations. Barry's wife joked that he cared more about rule books than romance. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so oppressive. Still, for a while, Marcus endured it. He believed that reason would win out, that common sense would eventually break through the bureaucracy. But Riverside Estates didn't run on reason. It ran on reputation, control, and fear of standing out. That summer, a drought settled over the region. The grass turned brittle, the air heavy with heat. The county issued fire warnings, and Marcus sent an email. Polite, factual, backed by data. reminding the HOA that emergency access should remain unobstructed in dry conditions. He copied the local fire marshal and attached a map of the neighborhood, highlighting the blocked secondary entrances. He received no reply. A week later, he got another violation notice. Unapproved external modifications. Back deck railing color does not match HOA-approved tone. It was as if Karen wanted to make a point, that she was untouchable. But beneath the surface, small cracks were forming. Neighbors had begun to whisper. A young couple down the street received a $500 fine for installing solar lights without written approval. Another family was reprimanded for parking their teenage son's car overnight in the cul-de-sac. The resentment simmered quietly. No one dared speak out, but everyone felt it. One evening, as Marcus was watering his plants, he noticed Karen's Lexus glide slowly past his house. She didn't stop. She didn't wave, but her eyes, visible even behind the windshield's glare, lingered a moment too long. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was a look of warning. He turned off the hose, watching her taillights fade into the curve of the street. A part of him wanted to believe she was just doing her rounds, but another part, the one honed by years of reading danger on smoky horizons, felt a chill he couldn't quite explain. In the following weeks, he found new incidents. Someone had moved his trash cans onto the lawn while he was at work, then snapped a photo and reported it as a violation. His mailbox flag had been bent backward, as though pried by force. At night he thought he heard footsteps near the side of his house, soft and fleeting. He started double-checking the locks. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition, and Marcus had seen enough in his career to know that small mistakes often led to big disasters, especially when pride and power were involved. At the next HOA meeting, the tension was palpable. A few residents had begun to question Karen's leadership, but she controlled the room with precision. Her voice, sharp and polished, left no space for dissent. When Marcus spoke up again about emergency access, she smiled thinly and asked, "Marcus, are you suggesting we dismantle our community's safety just to satisfy your personal anxieties?" The room laughed, not cruelly but nervously, the way people do when they're too afraid to side with the wrong person. Marcus sat down, jaw tight. He didn't know it then, but that would be the last meeting before everything changed. Because a week later, the fire that would expose Riverside's corruption began smoldering in the attic of Karen Hartley's perfect colonial home. At first, it was invisible, a slow electrical short, a whisper of heat behind insulation, but it was building, and when it finally roared to life, it would consume not just her house, but the illusion that Riverside Estates was ever truly safe. The residents didn't know it yet, but they were standing on the edge of reckoning. The rules they'd worshipped were about to turn against them. The walls they'd built to keep danger out were about to trap it inside, and Marcus Thompson, the man they dismissed as paranoid, was the only one who saw it coming. By the time spring rolled around, Oakwood Hills didn't feel like home anymore. What once smelled of fresh-cut lawns and morning coffee had turned sour, like something spoiled was brewing beneath the neat hedges and pristine fences. It started with a letter, a simple cream-colored envelope tucked under my doormat. No stamp, no signature, just a neat typed note on HOA letterhead. Violation notice. Your fence paint color does not meet community standards. Immediate compliance required. At first, I laughed. It was ridiculous. My fence had been white since the day I bought the house. Every other yard on my street had something similar, but somehow mine wasn't in compliance. I figured it was a mistake, so I left a polite voicemail with the HOA office. No response. Instead, a week later, I got another letter. This one carried a fine, $150 for failure to correct violation. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a fence. It was about control. The HOA president, Carol Winters, was the type of woman who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. She was always checking in, dropping by unannounced, clipboard in hand, pretending she was just passing through. But everyone knew she thrived on power. It wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood pretty. It was about keeping people in line, and now I was her new target. Soon, more notices arrived. The mailbox looked like a stack of warnings and threats. One day it was about the trash cans being visible from the street. Another about my grass being half an inch too long. Then came a complaint about the garden gnome my late wife had given me. Unapproved decorative item. They fined me $50 for it. That gnome had been there for 5 years. Nobody ever said a word until Carol's new regime took over. The tension didn't just live on paper, it bled into every corner of daily life. My next-door neighbor, Richard, started avoiding eye contact. He used to chat with me over the fence about football games and barbecues. Now he'd pull his garbage bins out at night when no one could see. Another neighbor, Patty, a notorious gossip, started whispering that I'd fallen behind on dues or caused trouble at the last meeting. None of it was true. But in Oakwood Hills, rumors spread faster than wildfire. It didn't stop there. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a bright orange sign staked in my yard. Property under review for violation. The HOA had placed it there for everyone to see. My stomach twisted as I watched neighbors walk by, slowing down just long enough to stare. I tried to laugh it off, but the humiliation stung deeper than I wanted to admit. When I finally confronted Carol during an HOA meeting, the room was already stacked against me. The board members, a cluster of smug, self-satisfied faces, sat in a semicircle, clutching their binders like shields. Carol leaned forward and said, "We all have to follow the rules. Mr. Jensen, that's what keeps Oakwood Hills beautiful." Her tone was syrupy, but her glare was pure venom. I tried to explain, to reason, but every word I said was twisted. "You're being combative. You're creating hostility. You're refusing to cooperate." Each accusation stacked higher until I realized what they were doing, painting me as the problem. When I asked to see the exact bylaw about fence color, Carol smirked and said, "Oh, that document isn't for public distribution." That night I went home and pored over the HOA's charter myself. After hours of reading dense legal texts, I found the clause. And it didn't even apply to fences built before 2015. Mine was from 2012. I wasn't in violation at all. The next day, I emailed Carol the proof. Her response was a single line, "We'll review your claim." Days passed. No apology. No correction. Instead, another fine appeared, this time for an unauthorized vehicle in driveway. My son's car. He was home from college for the weekend. Apparently, his car didn't have a resident decal, so it was subject to penalty. The absurdity of it all felt surreal, like I was living in a bad dream I couldn't wake from. Things escalated fast. The HOA started sending photos, literal surveillance shots of my home, time-stamped and printed in color. They were monitoring when I mowed my lawn, when I put out trash, even when I had guests over. I caught a man crouching near my mailbox one evening, taking pictures. When I confronted him, he claimed to be a compliance officer. No badge, no ID, just a clipboard. I started keeping a log, dates, times, everything. Because deep down I knew this wasn't random. It was personal. Carol wanted me gone. She'd done it before, too. Other homeowners had moved out after too many fines. Their houses quietly sold off under HOA pressure. The rumor was Carol's cousin was a realtor. The HOA would crush residents, then buy the properties cheap. It was around then that my friend Lisa, who lived 2 streets over, came to me shaking. "They're doing it to us too," she said. "They fined me for painting my shutters, even though they approved the color last year." She showed me the paperwork. It was identical to mine. Suddenly it all clicked. This wasn't about aesthetics or order. This was about money, power, and manipulation. The neighborhood began to split into factions, those who obeyed Carol out of fear and those quietly rebelling. Late-night whispers replaced morning hellos. Someone started slipping anonymous letters into mailboxes, warning people to watch their backs. The real breaking point came one Saturday morning. I woke up to the sound of shouting. When I stepped outside, a tow truck was hauling away my son's car. The HOA had authorized it, claiming it was parked overnight without registration. My son stood there helpless, watching his car disappear. Carol stood at the curb, clipboard in hand, pretending it was regrettable. Something snapped in me then. This wasn't just harassment. It was war. I started gathering evidence. Every letter, every notice, every petty infraction. I set up my own cameras, documenting everything. And what I caught shocked me. Late at night, HOA members were sneaking around properties, measuring lawns, photographing porches, even peeking over fences. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, but I went prepared. As the meeting began, Carol smiled, confident as ever. "Before we start," I said, standing up, "I have something to share." I played the footage on my phone, video after video of HOA members trespassing, whispering about getting rid of certain residents. Gasps filled the room. Carol's smile faltered, but the board wasn't done yet. The following week, they accused me of defamation. They claimed I'd violated the HOA's respect policy. They fined me again, $500 this time. I couldn't believe it. The audacity, the corruption. The more I fought back, the deeper they dug their claws in. Then came the final straw, a certified letter threatening foreclosure. They claimed my unpaid fines now exceeded the HOA's legal limit. They were moving to seize my home. The place I'd built memories, buried my grief, and poured my heart into for 15 years. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, that letter in my trembling hand, staring out at the white fence they said wasn't white enough. The silence was unbearable. The house felt like a coffin. But that silence, it didn't last long, because I was done being afraid. And I was just getting started. The day everything came to a head started like any other. Calm on the surface, chaos brewing underneath. The sky over Oakwood Hills was overcast, heavy with storm clouds that seemed to mirror the tension tightening across the neighborhood. By then, my life had become a routine of defense, logging fines, recording harassment, anticipating the next ambush. But that morning, as I stared at the foreclosure notice pinned to my front door, something inside me snapped for good. They had finally done it. The HOA was moving to seize my home. Carol Winters and her board of loyal enforcers had crossed the line from petty tyranny to open destruction. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had been preparing for this moment. For weeks, every notice, every voicemail, every sneaky late-night trespass had been documented, time-stamped, and verified. I had built a case so airtight that even the smug smile on Carol's face wouldn't survive it. Still, that didn't make the next few days easy. The HOA's tactics grew more aggressive, as if they sensed I was getting close. Anonymous letters appeared on my doorstep. "You can't win this. People have tried before." One morning, someone egged my garage. Another night, I heard footsteps outside my window at 2 a.m. When I called the police, they shrugged. HOA disputes are civil matters, they said, but this wasn't civil anymore. This was warfare in khakis and clipboards. Then came the emergency HOA meeting, the one they hoped would seal my fate. The notice was slipped under my door the night before. Mandatory attendance. Agenda: non-compliance and property foreclosure. It read like a verdict. My stomach twisted, but I didn't waver. I packed my folders, my recordings, my photos, and most importantly, the legal documents I'd quietly obtained with help from an attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. The next evening, the clubhouse was packed. More people than usual, neighbors whispering, glancing my way, the tension so thick it felt electric. Carol sat at the center table, draped in authority like a queen presiding over her court. To her left was Richard, my former friend, now her lapdog. To her right, the HOA treasurer, eyes cold, calculating. As the meeting began, Carol wasted no time. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice smooth and poisonous, "we're here tonight to finalize proceedings regarding your repeated violations and unpaid fines. You've shown a pattern of hostility and non-compliance that leaves us no choice but to act." I could hear the murmur ripple through the crowd. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I didn't speak, not yet. Carol loved to perform, and I wanted her to dig her own grave, she continued, reading off a list of absurdities. Unapproved vehicle, improper fencing, unauthorized ornamentation, disrespectful conduct toward board members. Each word dripped with condescension. Finally, she smiled that razor-edge smile. "And as of this moment, your total outstanding balance is $12,475. Unless paid immediately, foreclosure proceedings will commence within 72 hours. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room on me. "Are you finished?" I asked. Carol leaned back, smug. "Unless you have something relevant to add." "Oh, I do," I said, and my voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "But first, I'd like to make sure this meeting is being recorded publicly for the record." That wiped the smirk off her face. "That's not permitted," she said. "Actually," I replied, holding up a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, Section 4.2 says any homeowner can record a public meeting. "You wrote that rule yourself, Carol." The room buzzed with surprise. Carol's cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly. "Fine, record it. It won't change the facts." I pressed play on my phone. The audio that filled the room made her eyes widen. Voices, their voices. Carol and 2 board members whispering in the dark outside my home. Get the photo of his car. He'll break soon, they always do. "Once we foreclose, my cousin will list it fast. We'll make it back by spring." The crowd went silent. Every head turned toward the board. Carol froze, her mouth opening but no words coming out. The treasurer looked ready to bolt. I didn't stop there. I pulled out the photos, time-stamped images of board members trespassing, measuring lawns under cover of night, snapping pictures through windows. Gasps filled the air. "This," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline, "is your HOA. These people have been weaponizing rules for profit. They've targeted families, ruined reputations, and lined their own pockets with fake fines. And I have the proof, every document, every transaction, every threat. Right here!" Carol shot to her feet, her composure gone. "This is slander." She hissed. "No," I said, stepping closer. "This is justice." That's when I revealed the final blow. The letter from the state attorney's office confirming that a formal investigation into Oakwood Hills HOA had been opened, citing possible fraud and abuse of authority. The reaction was explosive. People began shouting, demanding answers. Some of Carol's loyalists tried to calm the crowd, but it was too late. Years of bottled-up resentment erupted all at once. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started stepping forward, telling their own stories. Fines for holiday decorations, threats over mailboxes, intimidation and favoritism. It was a floodgate of fury. Carol tried to gavel the room back to order, but her hands shook. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. "Not yet," I said. "You forgot one last thing." I held up my phone again, playing a final recording. Carol's voice, clear as day, sneering to another board member. "If he thinks he can fight this, we'll just bury him in fees. Nobody ever wins against us." The gasp that followed felt like an earthquake. Carol's face went pale. I could almost hear her composure cracking apart. Someone from the back shouted, "You're finished, Carol!" Another yelled, "You've been stealing from us!" The room devolved into chaos, shouting, anger, accusations flying like sparks. Carol grabbed her binder and stormed out, pushing past neighbors who once admired her. But the night wasn't over. As the crowd spilled into the parking lot, the storm finally broke. Lightning split the sky and rain came pouring down. I stood under the awning, watching as Carol's car peeled out, tires screeching on wet pavement. The next morning, Oakwood Hills was buzzing. Emails circulated, screenshots spread. People who had once bowed to the HOA's power were now questioning everything. By noon, a dozen homeowners had filed complaints with the county. By evening, the story hit local news. Homeowners accuse HOA of corruption and abuse. It felt surreal, seeing my own words on the screen, hearing the anchor say, "Resident exposes HOA corruption," with shocking recordings. For months, I'd been the villain in the story. Now I was the whistleblower, but victory didn't come clean. The HOA hit back hard. Carol's attorney sent me a cease and desist letter within days claiming I'd violated privacy laws. They threatened to sue for defamation. But this time, I wasn't alone. Neighbors started organizing, real community for the first time in years. We held meetings without the board's approval, collected signatures, demanded transparency. The pressure was relentless. Within a week, 2 board members resigned. Within a month, Carol was removed as president. Still, the fallout was ugly. One night, someone slashed my tires. Another time, I found a dead crow on my porch with a note pinned to it. "Snitches get buried." For a moment, fear crept back in. But then, something unexpected happened. people started standing guard. My neighbors, the same ones who'd once looked away. They brought cameras, lights, even coffee. We became a unit, defending our homes, our peace. Then came the final confrontation. The county investigator called a public hearing inviting homeowners to testify. Carol showed up with her lawyer wearing that same plastic smile. But she looked different, smaller, deflated. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told them everything, the harassment, the lies, the manipulation. I handed over evidence, recordings, statements from other residents. And when the investigator asked Carol if she had anything to say, she stammered. She tried to shift blame, but the documents spoke louder than she ever could. When the gavel struck, it was like thunder. The HOA was placed under state supervision pending a full audit. Carol's accounts were frozen. Her name, once whispered in fear, became a punchline. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. The air smelled cleaner. The sun felt warmer, and as I drove home, past the same pristine lawns and matching mailboxes that had once felt like a cage, I realized something. Freedom doesn't always come from breaking rules. Sometimes it comes from standing so tall that the rules break themselves against you. That night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I sat on my porch beside that little garden gnome, the one that started it all. The fines were gone, the foreclosure reversed, but the memories would never fade. Oakwood Hills would never be the same, and maybe that was a good thing because this wasn't just my victory. It was a reckoning. And in that quiet moment I smiled to myself, thinking, they built their power on fear, and I tore it down with truth. Little did I know, the ripple effects were only beginning, and the HOA world beyond Oakwood Hills was about to tremble. The weeks after the hearing felt strangely quiet, too quiet almost. For months, the constant hum of confrontation had filled every hour of my life. The late-night phone calls, the threats, the knocks at my door that came with yet another warning taped to the glass. Now, there was nothing but the sound of wind rustling through the trees. I'd almost forgotten what peace felt like. But that peace wasn't simple. It came wrapped in exhaustion and disbelief. Every time I looked at my porch, I expected to see another letter from the HOA, another list of violations, another fine. My instincts were slow to unclench. The scars of that war ran deeper than I thought. Oakwood Hills had changed, though. You could feel it in the air. The fear that used to hang over every conversation, that quiet compliance that kept people in line, it was gone. The homeowners who once avoided eye contact at board meetings were now openly talking, connecting, organizing. The illusion of control had shattered, and what rose from the pieces was something we hadn't seen in years: community. A week after the investigation began, state auditors arrived in the neighborhood. Clipboards, cameras, legal pads, they documented everything. The HOA office, once Carol's little empire, was torn apart, files spread across tables like the aftermath of a storm. People watched from their porches as the auditors carried boxes into vans. Word spread that financial discrepancies had been found, thousands of dollars in administrative fees, unaccounted for, fake invoices and contract payments to companies that didn't exist. When the news broke publicly, it hit like a lightning strike. The local paper ran the headline, "Oakwood Hills HOA under investigation for fraud and abuse of power." TV crews started showing up at the gate. Suddenly, the neighborhood that had once prided itself on privacy was the center of a scandal. Residents who'd been silent for years started coming forward with their own stories. Intimidation, selective enforcement, secret deals. It was like watching a dam burst. Carol tried to disappear. For a while, her house sat dark, her Lexus gone from the driveway. Rumors spread. She'd left town, moved in with her sister, maybe even fled the state. But she couldn't outrun what was coming. Within a month, the county prosecutor filed formal charges: embezzlement, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. When they showed her being led out of her home in handcuffs, the footage played on repeat for days. I didn't celebrate. I watched it in silence. There was no joy in seeing her like that, just a grim kind of closure. She had built her power on fear and arrogance, and it had finally consumed her. But the fall of the HOA was only half the story. The other half was what came after, the rebuilding. The interim board was formed by residents, real neighbors who actually cared. People like Mrs. Landry, who'd been fined for having a wheelchair ramp too close to the sidewalk, or the Taylors, who'd been threatened over the color of their fence. For the first time, every meeting was open, transparent. Financial records were posted publicly. Rules were rewritten with common sense. Gone were the absurd fines for garden ornaments or overnight guests. In their place came policies about communication, fairness, and safety. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I remember one evening, a month after the transition, walking down the main road and noticing something I hadn't seen before. Kids playing in the street again. Neighbors standing outside chatting, laughing. No one was peeking through blinds or whispering about violations. It felt human again. The sound of life had replaced the silence of fear. As for me, I stayed quiet for a while. I fixed my garden fence, repainted the porch, replaced the mailbox that had been vandalized twice. Every stroke of paint felt symbolic, like reclaiming a piece of my sanity. The foreclosure notice that once hung on my door was now framed in my garage, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. Then came the settlement. The state concluded its audit after 3 long months. They found over $180,000 in misappropriated funds and unapproved expenditures. The HOA's insurance policy covered part of the loss, but Carol and 2 other board members were held personally liable for the rest. Civil suits followed. The HOA was forced to restructure under court supervision for 2 years. When the judgment came down, the neighborhood threw a gathering at the park, not a celebration exactly, but a kind of collective exhale. People brought food, shared stories, laughed about how surreal it all felt. Someone handed me a cold drink and said, "You know, you're kind of a local hero now." I laughed, shaking my head. "Hero's a stretch," I said. I just got tired of being scared, but deep down I knew it was more than that. What started as one person standing up against petty injustice had become something bigger, proof that ordinary people could take back control from those who abused it. That night, as the sun set over Oakwood Hills, I looked around at the faces, people who'd once avoided me now shaking my hand, thanking me. It hit me then how much had changed, not just in the rules or the power structure, but in the spirit of the place. We had learned the hard way that silence enables tyranny and apathy invites corruption. But once you strip away fear, once you shine light on the rot, control collapses. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, but from the county's Department of Fire Safety. It was a simple thank you for assisting in the exposure of fraudulent local governance. But what caught my eye was the signature, one of the investigators I'd met during the process. Beneath his name, he'd written a single line, "You saved more than just your home." That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. I'd saved something intangible, a sense of dignity, of fairness. The idea that no one should live under fear in their own home. Months passed. Carol eventually pled guilty, accepted a plea deal. 3 years probation, restitution, and community service. I heard she was assigned to work with a local housing charity, helping maintain low-income properties. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the day I saw her again, that was something I'll never forget. It was early summer. I was driving past the community center when I spotted her planting flowers by the entrance, wearing a volunteer vest. She looked older, smaller somehow. When she saw me, our eyes met for a moment. No anger, no resentment, just recognition. She gave a small nod. I nodded back, and for a fleeting second there was peace. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Maybe even regret. After that day I never saw her again. But her presence lingered in the stories people still told, the cautionary tales, the lessons learned. Oakwood Hills thrived in ways no one expected. Without the constant tension, people started improving their homes, helping each other, hosting block parties. The property values, the very thing the old HOA claimed to protect, actually rose. And the new HOA bylaws included one rule I'd insisted on: no policy shall obstruct emergency services or restrict lawful access to any property. It was small, but it mattered. Sometimes I'd walk the streets at night and think about how far things had come. The flicker of porch lights, the hum of sprinklers, the laughter echoing from driveways, all the simple, ordinary things we'd once taken for granted. I found myself enjoying the quiet again, not the tense, watchful quiet of fear, but the comfortable silence of safety, the kind that lets you breathe without worrying what letter might show up tomorrow. It's strange how justice feels when it finally settles. It doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in slowly, filling the cracks where anger used to live. You start to realize the victory isn't in revenge. It's in peace, in knowing that the people who tried to break you didn't succeed. One evening, months later, I was sitting on my porch when a familiar voice called out from across the street. It was Richard, the former board member who'd once sided with Carol. He walked up, hands in his pockets, looking nervous. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I didn't have the guts to speak up." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You do now," I said. "That's what matters." We stood there for a while, the sky turning orange above the rooftops. It was the kind of moment that felt like closure, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Months later, when the new HOA held its first election, I was nominated to join the board. I almost said no. But then I thought about everything we'd been through, the fear, the fight, the fire that had reshaped us. I accepted, not because I wanted power, but because I understood what could happen when power goes unchecked. At our first meeting, I sat at the same table where Carol had once presided, her gavel replaced with a simple notepad. And I said, "Let's make this place somewhere people want to live again, not somewhere they're afraid to." The room nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it could happen. Now, years later, when I think about Oakwood Hills, it's not the conflict I remember. It's the transformation, the garden beds bursting with color, the laughter echoing at sunset, the feeling that this is what home was supposed to be all along. We learned something most neighborhoods never do, that rules don't build communities, people do. And when people choose truth over fear, no HOA, no title, no chain on a gate can stop them. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder, how many other neighborhoods are living under the same kind of quiet tyranny? How many homeowners are one letter away from breaking? Maybe one day they'll hear this story and realize what we did, that you can fight back, that you can win, that sometimes justice takes time, but when it arrives, it doesn't knock softly, it breaks the lock. And maybe that's the real lesson of Oakwood Hills. When control becomes a cage, freedom doesn't ask permission to enter.